Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'appelles manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'appelles.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly talk show on all the news bubbling here in Brussels and beyond. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, the continent has voted and the results are in. The winners, the pro-EU centre-right European People's Party. The losers, the Greens and the Liberals. And seeing surging support, the far-right nationalists. Now we'll start the game of forming coalitions among the 720 MEPs, a kind of political speed dating. We look at what message voters have sent to the EU, especially in France, where the election shook the establishment to its core. And 51.01%, the final percentage of eligible Europeans that voted in the European Parliament elections last weekend. The low turnout really shows just how far from people's daily lives the EU elections can seem. We take a closer look at what this voter apathy means for the future of the EU and ask what needs to change to give the European Parliament more sex appeal. With our panel, Tom van den Drieje, Flemish MEP with Identity and Democracy in the European Parliament. Welcome. Sophia Ruzak from the independent think tank SEPS. And Owen Dre from the EPP think tank, the Wilfred Martin Centre. Thank you so much for coming in to us. Lovely to have you with us. But as usual, let's just remind our viewers what the big headlines from these elections were.
4 days of elections, 27 countries for 720 seats in this grandiose institution. But what the public is talking about is France. The EU elections showed just how unpopular the pro-European French president actually is, and how much appeal the nativist radical right have become. Similar picture in Berlin, where the coalition of Olaf Scholz was shaking to its core and the xenophobic AfD swept up all the votes in Germany's east. With the Franco-German axis in turmoil, all eyes on the Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni, whose Brothers of Italy party had one of the best nights of its political life. The question now, will Italy's far-right leader become the kingmaker from these EU elections and pull the whole EU to the right with her?
So that is the question. What a week it's been here in Brussels with so many various briefings on the elections. But Sophia, let's start with you because you were in the Parliament as well on Sunday night into the early hours of the morning. How have you been reading into these results? What's your take? Do you think the centre has held, as Ursula von der Leyen said in her victory speech?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there were very little surprises in that sense, right? The polls are quite accurate. That showed us already that indeed the left is going to lose mainly because of the Greens and the Liberals, and the right, mainly due to the far right, is going to gain. A little surprise, I would say, is that the EPP did better than was predicted. But indeed, the centre holds. Why was that? Why did the EPP do so well, do you think?
Well, I think actually, France is probably a very good example of why the centre-right and the centre-left are so important in European politics. President Macron, he came in, he split the centre-right, he split the centre-left. And now we're looking at a situation where Marine Le Pen is by far the largest party in the European Parliament and in polls for the general election. So I think, it's very important in a People's Party, like the European People's Party, that you give a voice to a lot of different viewpoints, be it from centre-right all the way across. And that's very important. And I think what the elections have shown, as Sophia has said, is that the EPP now is central to any coalition that will be built. There cannot be a coalition without the EPP.
And we'll come back to that in a minute, but let's just bring in our Flemish interest, the name of your party, Vlaams Belang. I mean, the ID group that you're affiliated with, it didn't do as well as everyone thought. I mean, you were hoping to do better. You got 58 seats, but at the end of the day, you'll still remain pretty powerless on the periphery of the European Parliament.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Voters gave a clear message and all of our parties are winning or entering Parliament now. For example, the Chega party from Portugal, the party of Geert Wilders, the PVV, got 7 seats, if I'm correct, and they came in with 1 seat, from 1 to 7 seats now. My party retained its 3 seats, but we're the largest party in the whole of Belgium. Rassemblement National, is by far the largest in France. So basically, in Italy, we are also doing well. together with the party of Meloni, if I may put it this way. So I think the message is really clear. This election was about the climate madness of the Green Deal and the asylum chaos with the EU Migration Pact. Now I think we need to turn to the right, and I sure hope we are open for business. We're here in Parliament to defend the interests of people. My party is called the Flemish Interest Party. So we are looking forward to meeting with all of the other members of Parliament and see what we can do.
So you're open for business, you're very eager, but do you have any friends? That's the thing.
Well, I think these parties now will have to make a decision, because to the right of the EPP, there's three basic groups. There's, I think, what can be described as the constructive Europeans, which is an element of the ECR. I would put Meloni in that. And then I think there are what I would call as the destructive Europeans, which are, most of the ID group and elements of the ECR, which are very play into the populist anti-EU rhetoric.
If I may interrupt you, I don't accept calling us destructive European forces. I think basically what we are saying is that we want to reconstruct the European Union how it was originally intended to be. So economic cooperation, we want to focus...
Maybe anti-democratic would perhaps be more accurate. But just bring us then into that meeting. You had meetings yesterday. Or
Excuse me, are you just saying we are anti-democratic?
Slightly, yeah.
Sorry, but if we want to continue this discussion, I hope we can have some how should I say, politeness. My party or my group is not an anti-democratic group or party. We promote democracy.
People who used to be affiliated with were, for example, the members of the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, which you've since kicked out of the party. Would you take them back in?
Well, we'll see what happens. All of discussions are now going on. The groups are formed the 3rd of July. But if you want to continue this discussion, I hope I don't get any more of this name calling.
Bring us into the meeting. You had talks this week in the hotel in Brussels with your colleagues. What is your plan for Europe, and who are you hoping, to build alliances? You said you're open for business, so who and how do you see that?
We start from the framework of the ID group. I want to stress that ID group is mostly represented in the founding members of the European Union, the countries who are the net contributors to the European Union. In all of these countries, set aside AFD, but this is a specific case, we are the largest or the second party. So I think this signal of the voters cannot be neglected. So, and we start from the framework of the ID group, and now we are into talks with all of new parties coming in, with existing parties. We'll see what happens in the next weeks.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting. We'll have lots of new faces in the European Parliament. How will that shake things up? Because at the end of the day, that's the message as well voters have sent. We saw as well in countries like Ireland, a lot of people voting for independence. They really are moving off from the traditional parties. They don't really want business as usual, Sophia.
Yeah, I think what is important to keep in mind is that there was no far-right surge, as it is often portrayed, right? There is a rise, and it is a steady rise already for the last 20 and even more years, right? What we are actually seeing is that now we have about 24% MEPs sitting to the right of the EPP. Before it was about 22. And I think it's important for our discussion that we, that we remind ourselves of this and that we don't use words like surge.
Indeed, and that everyone is open to compromise.
May I add an element to this, what you are saying? Well, I think we'll need to look at it in a broader perspective. You look at the first election in 1979, then the Socialists were the largest group until 1999. Then the EPP was the largest group until 2019, and these two groups together, they had a majority of at least 55%. I think you can agree with me on this. We have seen this majority being broken in 2019. Then the Socialists and the Christian Democrats, they needed another group. And they looked at the left. They looked at the Greens on occasion. They looked at the Liberals. And now we see it is it's exactly the same. The EPP has the key. That's obvious. But which way is the EPP turning? Are they again turning to the left or turning to the right? I sure hope we will enter in mature discussions.
Well, we have a gentleman here who's affiliated to a think tank who works with the EPP. And of course, we were looking this week at Ursula von der Leyen. Now that the campaign is finished, the elections are over, all eyes on these coalition building. She said in her speech on Sunday night that she'll be reaching out to the Socialists, she'll be reaching out to the Renew, that they've worked so well. Will she, in your eyes, be the next President of the Commission?
Well, I think just as a kind of a parliamentary and a democratic process, I think she has a clear mandate now that the EPP are the biggest party in the parliament. Her name will go to the European Council. The EPP, I think, have 12 prime ministers in the European Council. So my expectation would be that her name will go forward then to the European Parliament for ratification. What happens in the European Parliament maybe is the subject of all the discussions at the moment.
She comes out of these elections stronger,
yes,
I would argue,
absolutely.
right? The EPP is a bit stronger, the centre holds, Macron is weaker.
He's weaker.
So I think in the European Council, we can expect her to be appointed. But indeed, the Parliament is another thing.
Yes.
And of course, it would make a mock, wouldn't it, of this whole Spitzencandidate process if she wasn't endorsed as the candidate.
Yeah.
It has always been a laughable process. There's not such a thing as a European democracy, or there are 27 different elections, and voters determine on national interest who are they voting for. People cannot even vote for the Spitzenkandidaten. Not even all of the candidates were allowed in the debates. Just imagine that. You call us anti-democratic. The debates of the European Union, our candidate was excluded from it.
Well, the whole idea, of course, is to try and make these elections interesting and to put a face right to the whole elections.
Yeah, it's true. But of course, indeed, this time around, I don't know in how well this has worked, indeed.
Well, look, this week we've seen many people reacting to the outcome of those elections, many wondering what kind of policies we'll see now in the next couple of years, cooked up really over in the European Parliament and voted upon. For his take, we checked in with Friends of Europe's Dharmendra Kanani. Take a listen.
I think what we witnessed at this weekend was a very sad and tragic moment in Europe's history. Just as we were commemorating the heroes that brought freedom to Europe, we witnessed an ideology return from the past, from the 1930s, an ugly vision of people, an ugly vision of the future. The debate will become more toxic about migration, about values, what you and I owe each other, what you and I can expect from each other, what we can expect from government. It will be a different kind of social contract. The point that's made by individuals is that they don't trust politicians. They believe, and many of them said this weekend, it's great, they seduce me for one day and they forget me for the rest. And I don't matter anymore. And I think that's really sad.
The words there of Dharmendra Kanani, who really was not pleased with the future that the European Union could take with so much at stake, for example, for the climate right now. When we need some sort of a Green Deal, we need, of course, to manage migration. You need a migration pact that works. We could see as well emerging trade wars in the next couple of months and years. And what about social Europe? I mean, poverty, social exclusion is a major problem and a major issue that needs to be addressed in order for the EU to actually function. What would you say to that?
Well, for example, the Green Deal. What is wrong with the Green Deal? It's causing deindustrialization of Europe, and it's causing impoverishment, a lack of purchasing power of ordinary people. And people have had enough of this. And it is
even though it hasn't even been implemented yet, to be honest, it's still more just paper.
Let me finish my argument, for example.
Yeah.
It is set aside these two aspects on a strategic level. It's a complete nonsense, because if you want to electrify everything, for example cars, then you need rare earth. Where are the world supplies of rare earth? In China, North Korea and Russia. Do we want to become dependent of these kind of countries? So, and the second is the migration deal. My party and my group fully supports the right to asylum, but we only think it should be in the region of origin. The right to asylum cannot be misused as a right to migrate.
These are serious challenges that will have to be addressed, right, by the incoming Parliament, the incoming Commission.
Yeah.
Will they get it right?
If we look at, what Eurobarometer data tells us, then we see that climate change is still very much on people's minds and is still very much a concern. But the problem is that other issues came up, right? The world is not the same 24 anymore than it was 2019. So now security issues and competitiveness issues. So economics is back, right? And so
I would say reality is back, because Europe is good for 8% of the global CO2 emissions. We cannot save the world from Europe.
I think what we will see in the next Commission is kind of a refocusing on the older priorities of the European Union that many people think didn't get the attention that they should have over the last 5 years. So stuff like the single market to drive wealth and affluence and economic growth. We're going to have an industrial policy. I don't think the Green Deal is dead, but I think we will have.
It will be adjusted, in my opinion.
We will have a more realistic, I think, implementation phase for the Green Deal, particularly when it comes to rural Europe, impact on farmers, stuff like that. So I think there will be, we hope in the EPP, a refocusing on...
Yeah, the farmers
and what is interesting, for all of the topics you mentioned, ID Group is partnered to enter into negotiations.
Well, we're curious to see how this new ID Group works in the next couple of years.
We have always been very collaborative.
And speaking of the ID Group, let's talk about France. We need to talk about France, right? I mean, the problem child, really, of the European Union, if you look across the board.
I would call it the hope of Europe, not the problem child.
You would call it the hope?
I don't know what kind of show this is.
Well, I mean, it's a problem in the sense that we've seen how in favour of European integration and Emmanuel Macron is, and in favour of a functioning Europe, and then...
and he got voted out.
Indeed, he's very unpopular.
This is what democracy is all about, I think. People having the power to vote out those in power.
And that's why we have elections.
And I hope we can cherish this all. That we do not need to vote for every time the same people in power.
Let's just have a listen, actually, now to Emmanuel Macron, who really shook the European Parliament last Sunday to its core when he made a radical announcement on live TV. Take a listen.
J'ai décidé de vous redonner le choix de notre avenir parlementaire par le vote.
I have decided to give you back the choice of our parliamentary future by voting. I am therefore dissolving the National Assembly this evening. In a few moments, I will sign the decree calling for legislative elections, which will be held on the 30th of June for the first round and on the 7th of July for the second. This is a serious and heavy decision, but above all, it is an act of confidence.
Un acte de confiance.
So there you go. A bit of a gamble there. I mean, what's your take on all this in France?
It was a big surprise, right? We were both in the parliament, and these 1,000 journalists that were present, I think none of them had expected that. Not even the prime minister apparently had known that he's going to do this. Look, I think he bases his assumptions on the fact that people vote differently in EP elections than they vote nationally. Yeah. So we see that in European elections, people tend to vote more right-wing or generally more for the margins, let's say. And he hopes that the trend will be different on national level.
Oh, and how did the financial markets react to that news?
Well, I think there was initial shock at the beginning, but we shouldn't forget that, you know, France has a lot of very deep-seated economic problems that go back way before Macron. It hasn't run a budget surplus since 1974. There is a lot of nervousness on the financial markets. At current projections, France will have a higher debt to GDP than Greece by the end of the decade.
And would, if Marine Le Pen, for example, if she was in the Elysée as of 2027, would she be able to fix those problems?
I sure think that Marine Le Pen, for a lot of French citizens, is the person who gives hope for another kind of policy. And it's up to the French to decide on that. I'm not going to decide on what choice they should make, but I fully support this election result, and I sure hope that Marine Le Pen will be elected president in 2027, which I think will be the next stop in this term.
It's so important, I think, as a politician, you have a responsibility to spread a message of hope. The thing is, though, you need policies as well that work.
Well, you have mentioned how good the policies work of those in power for the last 40 years. So I think France needs to change, and I think maybe the whole of Europe needs to change.
I think it's important to note, just, you know, on a factual basis, I remember in 2014, my first day in the Wilfred Martin Centre, there was panic in Europe because for the 2014 elections, Marine Le Pen's big policy was that there would be a referendum on France's membership of the euro currency. If you check, you know, her election manifesto for 2014, that's all gone. She wants to, you know, reconstruct Europe from within. So I think what President Macron is trying to do is kind of trying to do the Finnish strategy, which is where they brought the true Finns into government, and of course, when that happens, their popularity, you know, halved almost overnight. It's a high-risk gamble. I'm not sure if it'll happen in France. The dynamics are different, but we'll have to see.
So we have to see. We'll be reporting on it here on Euronews every step of the way, with France being such an important country of the European Union. And very interesting as well to see Giorgia Meloni as well surging in popularity in Italy, and also...
Yes, contradicting what you just said.
Well, not necessarily, because Meloni's popularity over the last 5 years has actually just come, you know, has been corresponded with a sharp decline in Salvini's popularity. So the support for the far right in Italy hasn't surged.
Communicating voter blocks, I think you also see this phenomenon on the left. What I think about French politics is that we have seen the collapse of the traditional ruling parties, the Socialist and the Gaullist party, and the Les Républicains, the UMP. So we have seen this collapse, and then the alternative is either to the left, the Islamo-Socialist party of Monsieur Mélenchon. And on the other side, there's the, like they call it in France, the Union des Droites, the union of the right-wing forces. And as today, Mr. Ciotti, he announced that he will support Marine Le Pen. So things are moving. I think in the direction of common sense policies.
Well, on that point, we can close this discussion. Stay with us, though, here on Euronews, because after the break, we'll be taking a look at why so few people show up for the EU Parliament elections. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with my guests, we're just taking a look back at the news of the week. Well, this week, as world leaders were soul-searching at the G7 in Italy, the staff at the European Parliament were trying to come to terms with the turnout of the EU elections. Although the highest yet, it was just a tiny percentage higher than back in 2019. Surprising, given the effort they also put into working with platforms to raise awareness. As you can see there, back in 2014, it was 42.61%. 2019, it was right up to 50.66%. But then, last Sunday, it was just 51.01% that showed up. And why are people just not interested in these elections? What's wrong?
Well, I guess one of the reasons is that people don't feel really represented here in Parliament at European level, and the European Parliament is basically a phony parliament. It looks like a parliament, you can elect officials, but it's not a real parliament. You cannot sack the government because there is no government. You cannot file motions for law, for example, you propose law. So I think it's difficult to sell the idea of being represented in the European Parliament. My party wants to abolish the European Parliament.
Your party wants to abolish the European Parliament, but of course it's a co-legislator now. It has much more power than it did in the past.
Yeah, I see, more the political parties and the national media on responsibility here. We see that national parties invest less money in campaigning for the European Parliament, and we also see national media having a much less interest. I mean, the reporting is much thinner than on national elections.
True.
That is a very true point. Do you think it's disenchantment with EU politics? Is that the reason for voter apathy?
Not so much in general. I think it's just still in people's minds run as 27 national campaigns. So it's the issues in Flanders or it's the issues in Ireland or in Germany which are motivating voters primarily. I think, like, if you were trying to think of an analogy, the European Parliament elections are still more CNA than Chanel. in the sense that, people have a hierarchy of needs, and probably national elections are very much.
But for these elections, it was popping up on Instagram, on YouTube, on Google that, these elections are taking place. So people were even getting a nudge, but still.
Well, I think we need to be very careful that we consider the real world and just not social media bubbles, even if it's run by the main tech companies in Europe. Where I come from in rural County Kilkenny, people aren't going to vote because it pops up on Twitter, or they're going to vote because their local school closed down or whatever like this. So I think sometimes people in Brussels kind of forget this, but
But for you, I know you spent a lot of time on social media and a lot of money as well, investing in being there, being where the people are on Instagram, on different platforms. How much did you spend on that?
I think about 500,000 euros in the last 5 years. And I think it is necessary because my party we are the largest party in Belgium, and we have 1% on speaking time on public television. Just imagine that, talking about democracy. So I think it's my duty as a representative to explain what my points of views are, what am I doing here in European Parliament. We also have communication budgets provided by the European Union to do this. So we are effectively using this to inform about their representatives.
And was that the right place to be? Or did you think it worked?
I don't know how you would consider working it. I have a lot of reach on social media, so people know what I'm doing here in Parliament. And I got 318,000 preferential votes, which is the highest in Flanders, the second in Belgium.
And one thing that was unique as well about the elections this time in Belgium was the fact that 16-year-olds could go out and vote here for the very first time. And we wanted to hear how young people felt about this and the elections in general. So we took our microphones to the universities here in the city.
It was my first time to vote during the European election. It was really special.
I really like getting to have a say in our policies, and since this is really the only way we can do, I think it's very important to go vote.
It's important that everyone votes to really show that we want to have the democracy and not want to have it destroyed by wrong directions, kind of.
I think the majority of all laws and rules that are made currently are decided on European level. So this is the time for us as citizens to say what we would really like.
I think Europe is quite important for us. It's like a big thing, you know. And I think a lot of people try to push it down a bit. So I think it's really important to stick together as Europe.
So interesting to hear the views there of young people, some of them voting for the very, very first time. Sophia, you've been looking into this, researching. Do you think this is a good idea to have 16-year-olds go to vote?
Well, I generally think it's a good idea. Research also has shown that the earlier people start to vote, the more likely it is that they keep on voting for their whole life, so that this democratic practice is really... But in Germany, if I can share this, we were a little bit surprised by how the young were voting, because 5 years ago, the young, so the below 25-year-olds, they voted for more than 30% of them voted Greens, and now it was 17% AfD and 17% Christian Democrats. And the Greens only on the third place. And that is quite surprising, right?
That young people are getting so conservative.
Perhaps that's an issue, but I think it's also an issue that they might be seeing the dysfunction at a national level in Berlin, for example.
Yeah, it's
you know,
and they feel they have no hope for the future.
Yes.
They can't afford a house.
Yes, well, I think housing is becoming one of the critical issues that will define the next...
Due to the Green Deal, the mandatory renovation of houses costs 200,000 euros on average in Germany. This may be one of the reasons. And if you add to that here, particularly in Flanders, the population density, which is rising due to migration, well, indeed, housing prices, people just cannot afford it anymore.
And what concretely will you be able to do now for the people who voted for you, especially the youth that are looking to you now as an MEP for answers?
Yes, well, I'm one of 720 MEPs now, and I will defend their interest with every speaking time that I have and every tool at my disposition. But talking about the voting rights for 16-year-old, my party is by far the largest. We are close to 30% amongst 16 to 24-year-olds. But we were not in favor of lowering the voting age. Voting is mandatory in Belgium. Why not? Because you're not even responsible if you do a criminal act, for example, at 16-year-old. Your parents are responsible for you. How come you should go out and vote? And it was basically an idea of the Green Party here in Belgium, because they looked at the 2019 election, and then there were a lot of climate activists, and they said, well, we need to give voting rights to these people, so we will have more votes. Well, this blew up in their face.
Well, from our report there earlier, it feels like people actually they enjoyed having that.
There can be a difference between what people see on the media and what is in reality.
Well, we have viewers all around the place, so do get in touch with us here at Euronews and let us know how you feel about giving the vote at 16. But on that conclusion, we can bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much to our panellists for being with us here this weekend, and thank you so much for watching. If you want any more in-depth analysis on any of those results and how, of course, those coalitions and alliances are looking, check out our website. It's euronews.com. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, along with my panel. We're talking through the news of the week, which of course was dominated by the elections. And one country we didn't want to leave out was Belgium, the de facto EU capital and the home of NATO, as last Sunday was Super Sunday here. A triple vote that's shaken up Belgian politics and seen as well the resignation of the Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo. But we want to know how long it could take for this country to form a new government and if we could be faced with months of gridlock like we were in the past. So let's take a listen first to the Belgian political scientist David Sinnerday.
There's something very special about this Belgian election, that is that it seems quite simple and that it could go quite fast, in theory at least, which is quite an extraordinary situation for Belgium. At the federal level there is one big question, that is how much importance will the NVA attach to institutional reform, to state reform, Flemish autonomy, because if they really put this high on the agenda, that might complicate things. So it won't be easy to try and compensate different visions by throwing some money at the problem.
So there you go, Professor David Sinnerday there giving us his take on the current state of Belgian politics. It's of course a complicated country, no? We can show perhaps our viewers as well a map. And you can talk us through the map maybe, Tom, as the only Belgian here around the table with the Flemish region on top.
The north is the Flemish region, and we're more than 60% of the population. We're good for 70% of taxes being paid, good for 80% of exports, but we only have 50% of political power. And the financial transfer from Flanders to Walloon region is higher in percents of GDP than from West to East Germany after communism fell. Just imagine that. But something very interesting happened now is that in the Walloon region, which is traditionally dominated by socialist and communist parties, now the Liberal Party and the centrist Christian Democratic Party have a majority.
And of course, that map doesn't show it all. There's also a Flemish part in Wallonia and a Wallonian part in Flanders. And you are based in Flanders and also had the opportunity to vote. So Belgian politics is close to your heart.
Yep.
What's your take on what's happening?
For the last 5 years, Belgium has been very successful in ignoring the need for economic reform. It's got high debt, low growth. I think it's very, very important that the next government at a federal level is a centre-right-led government, which is a government to implement reforms and get the country back on track.
You're telling people exactly what they don't want to hear because, of course, Wallonia has been very left-wing and indeed Flanders a bit more right. So it's hard, Sophia, isn't it, to find compromise here?
But I think one misconception, at least in the media, that I hear all the time, to my understanding, is that De Croo, he didn't resign because of the defeat. He would have resigned anyhow because it is a constitutional practice, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it just adds a bit of drama, doesn't it?
When
the Prime Minister has to resign on the night...
But I think actually in this case, which is very unusual, I think Wallonia sets the template. We've already had the French-speaking Liberals and the French-speaking Christian Democrats come together to say they're going to form a government in Wallonia. I think it's very important for Belgium that a new federal government is elected before the local elections in October. For that stability.
And the keys, I guess, lie in the hands now of N-VA, no? And Bart de Wever, the mayor of Antwerp.
And especially on the promises Bart de Wever made to the voters. He said, first of all, I'm going to balance the budget, so we cut spending. Good luck with that with Walloons, even if they are on the right. And because Flanders is paying the bill of Wallonia. And the second is the institutional reforms. We want more power, fiscal autonomy, for example, that we can have the policies we want, and the Walloons can have the policies they want, but you also pay for it. You pay for your own bills. So, and I think the second agenda, I don't think that Bart de Wever really means it. Why? Because in 2014 he had 33% of the vote, the largest party by far in Belgium. And he just ignored any institutional reform. This is a price one has to pay in Belgium to come to power at the federal level. And this is what frustrates Flemish.
One of the key takeaways from this election was also that the Vlaamse Belang did not do as well as predicted.
Well, we are the major winner of this election. We won the most votes, the most seats. We're the largest party in 3 out of 5 Flemish provinces.
But
we're
not
the largest
in the Flemish Parliament.
Largest party
not
for
in
the
the
European
Flemish Parliament.
And on that conclusion, we have to bring this discussion to an end, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for coming into us here at Euronews. Thank you so much as well, and as well to Owen. And thank you so much for watching. Any comments on anything you've heard today or any stories that you would like us to take a look at, do reach out. brusselsmylove@euronews.com is our email address. You can also catch us on social media. Send us a direct message. Take care and see you soon.